Hi, I'm Nikki, the Obsessive Bookseller, and welcome to my top 10 of 2022 list. I had such a fun year in reading, which is in stark contrast to the year prior where there were only 10 titles that were worthy of mentioning at the end of the year. This year there were so many that I had to make a few hard decisions, and there are a few I left off the list that kind of hurt me in the feels. But it's amazing. It means that my restructuring of my reading life has paid off because I am focusing on the best books first, and I am just having more fun now than I ever have before. First up, Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. This one barely made the cut because I read it back in January, and I had to channel all of those memories of how much fun I had reading it at the time, because I admit books 2 and 3 kind of soured my experience on the whole thing. But at the time, I picked this one up on a total whim, and it was absolutely delightful. Just this perfect combination of fun, cool world building, interesting characters. I especially like the magic system. It's kind of reminiscent of Brandon Sanderson, like two different things from him actually. The stamping magic in his Emperor's Soul series and Allomancy from Mistborn. So it's kind of like a hodgepodge of both of those things. And yeah, just found it absolutely delightful. What's more, my experience with this book, having read it on a total whim, kind of sparked my appreciation for deviating from the plan a little bit. Happy to have this one on the list. In an Absent Dream by Sheena McGuire, part of the Wayward Children series, which is a series I'm mostly loving. There have been some hit or misses, but this one was an absolute win. One of my favorite little contained stories that I've ever read. Such a cool world. I love the concept of it. It takes place in this goblin marketplace in a world where there are checks and balances, so every commitment has a consequence. You've got to kind of balance your level of give and take, and it was such a cool concept. I love the way it was done. It was such infused with this atmosphere and magic that really transported me to this world. And what's more, these stories are usually split where you spend time in the real world with the character and then go with them as they venture through their doors. And this one had a perfect balance of both. I love the beginning, I love the second half. Absolutely love that one. Surprising everyone as much as it has me, a young adult book, The Body Finder by Kimberly Derting. First book in a 4-book series, and I was wildly entertained throughout this whole thing. Now, it has a lot of the tropes that you normally don't like in YA, but they were handled better than I've ever seen them done before. For example, there is a love story in this one, but it's a love story based on friendship and this deep connection, and you can actually see the draw between the characters, so it's very organic. And that is not something very typical in young adult books. I also love the murder mystery aspect of it. It was a lot of fun, and this girl essentially has the ability to sense dead bodies, and kind of getting inside the criminal mind and seeing her interactions with the case, and the criminal trying to figure out how he's been found out after laying low for so long. I'm excited to continue the series. I haven't made time for it. My amount of available time for young adult is fleeting, but I very much enjoyed this one. Surprising as well, a middle grade book, The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud, part of the Bartimaeus trilogy, and it has a prequel novel too that I would also read. It's very good. This one was a highlight of my year. We read it for Patreon Book Club, and I immediately picked up the sequels and devoured the whole thing in about a month. This evokes all of that nostalgia of reading Harry Potter as a kid and all of those childhood stories that you feel like you could just never quite get back. This one gave that back to me in abundance. It's a fun story for kids, but it's also sophisticated enough to appeal to adults. It has these footnotes in it that are absolutely hilarious. A lot of subtle and sometimes not so subtle adult humor that it worked for me on all accounts. I found the story compelling. I loved the demons. I thought they were so interesting. And the series maintained its strength throughout the entire thing with one of the best trilogy enders I've ever read. So yeah, big win. Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee. This is a novella that comes out next year sometime. And from the minute that I saw the cover and read the excerpt, I'm like, this is a story I need to prioritize highly. Everything about it screams to the type of books I love reading about. I love the day-to-day lives of taking care of animals in a stable setting and training them, learning how to ride them, all of that stuff. I love it. I should have been a zookeeper. And this one delivered on all accounts. And what's more, I found the conflict of the story really interesting. The characters were very evoking for me. I found a personal connection to the main character. And to top it all off, the momentum of this short story really culminated into something I found meaningful, and I loved the progression of the story and how it ended. And I left it feeling very satisfied, but also wishing she would write more in this world. Hopefully she's not done here yet because I loved it. Did I mention I loved it? I loved it. Wisdom of Crowns by Joe Abercrombie. It was a toss-up between this one and Trouble of Peace. I read both of them this year. And it's honestly amazing to me that Abercrombie isn't higher up on my list. It might be because I read it so long ago. It was back in February and March. I do have recency bias. My favorite of the series remains Best Served Cold. That being said, this final trilogy was amazing. Such depth of character. These feel like real people, and they are in such awful situations that I found the series hard to read. It's very gut-wrenching, but it also made me laugh a lot. Abercrombie always makes me laugh. And I ended up on this book as my favorite because of the way it ended. There was so much depth there, and it speaks to a broader plot that we will hopefully be getting in a continuation series at some point. Abercrombie continues to be one of my top authors, and I've said it before, but I think he's giving Robin Hobb a run for her money as my favorite author. It's close, because Robin Hobb can rip my soul out, but Abercrombie can do that and make me laugh at the same time. Books by John Gwynne. I'm cheating here by including 2, so if you're counting. This year, I read the first 2 books in the Faithful and the Fallen series and the first book in the Bloodsworn. I find it difficult to differentiate between the 2 as far as relative enjoyment. I don't know that I liked one more than the other, but they were both equally fantastic. Some of the best writing that I've ever come across. He's got this very slow burn storytelling, but at the same time manages to make things fast-paced, and it's the way he structures his chapters, the way he builds momentum and has characters change their state of being from the beginning of the chapter to the end, so you feel like you're making a lot of progress in a very short amount of time. Because you are. There is not a single pointless word in this man's books, and they are huge, so you've got such substance here. I can't believe it took me so long to get around to reading them. I knew I would really love them. What I will say is that they do require a lot more concentration than a typical fantasy, because especially in Malice, there are a lot of characters that you're following. And for me, I'm such a perfectionist that as soon as I lose track of who someone is, I lose investment in the story. So I've got to be really particular with it and make sure I remember everybody. So Malice was an incredibly slow read. Valor, the second book, went a lot quicker for me, and I'm hoping Ruin I'll be able to breeze right through just because I'm acclimated with everybody. But yeah, gut-wrenching, no one's safe. When you talk about high-stakes fantasy, a lot of times, especially in classic books, no one ever dies. So you don't really feel that fear for the characters or an emotional investment because you know they are always going to be there. And is not the case with this series. He is brutal, and it is perfection. Can't wait to read more. I'm kind of slowly working my way through the whole thing, and I don't know what I'm going to do when I run out of John Gwynne. I ran out of Abercrombie, so now this is my next main focus. Sneaking in right at the last minute because I finished it today, Tyranny of Faith by Richard Swan. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy. This one doesn't come out until February. I liked the first book. It had some interesting characters, a really cool way of telling the story. Very unconventional, and I like the kind of very subtle magic system, but the very moral implications that dredged up, and I find the characters' behavior in this series absolutely fascinating because they are not following my typical expectations. They feel more like real people because of that. So while I like the first one, I absolutely love the second one. The first one the mystery was a bit lacking for me, whereas in the second one I was completely engaged the entire time. So many moving pieces, but you feel like he's got a plan for it all. You feel like the structure is there for something incredibly satisfying, and you're just going along for that momentum-building ride. I thought the characters were especially poignant in the second book. I had trouble with the main character, or at least from her perspective. Her name is Helena. She's telling the story of Von Vault, and that's why it's kind of a atypical storytelling, because Von Vault, by all accounts, should be the main character, but you're getting from his assistant's perspective. Anyway, so his assistant, Helena, I had trouble with her in the first book. I found her very immature, and she was a little hard to read. But the second book, she hasn't really changed much, but she's grown, and it feels authentic to the text. I have an absolute connection to her, and I'm loving reading her accounting of these things that are happening. And it's so cool because it's like she's telling the story from in the future, like she's penning what happened back in the day. And that doesn't seem to be taking away any momentum or enjoyment from the story at all. In fact, it adds another layer of introspection that I'm really liking. It's very subtle, and that's part of why I like it so much. So yes, very much love this one. Cannot wait for the third book. Age of Ash, first book in the Kithamar series by Daniel Abraham. Not only is he one of my favorite writers, because he's responsible for a couple of other series, The Dagger and the Coin, The Long Price Quartet, and he's part of the duo that wrote the Expanse series under James S.A. Corey. What strikes me about his writing is that it's a very slow burn, it's very subtle and very beautiful, and it's all about the deep connection to these characters. His worlds are always so richly developed and not even really highlighted a lot in the story. It's very subtle, atmospheric background that just enmeshes you in this world and this culture. He's so good at infusing those subtle cues of culture. It just infuses everything the characters are doing and what they're saying, and I absolutely love that. This book, I've heard some criticism on it for it being kind of too slow of a burn, but for me it worked on all accounts. There's so much going on here, and he's not even scratched the surface of everything in this first book. There are all of these periphery characters that haven't really gotten a spotlight yet, and I know they have so much more depth to add to the story of what's going on. This should be telling. I read this one in December and January of last year, and I can still remember everything about it vividly. I remember the characters, I remember the situations, and I am just dying to pick up the next one. So huge success for me. And finally, my number one favorite book of the year, I'm sure you've all seen it coming, Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This book worked for me on all accounts. I already love sci-fi, but I particularly love the type of sci-fi that focuses on a biological component, because I love world building in books. It's my favorite aspect. I always rate books a little bit higher if they do that category well, even if other categories are weak. And I love the creation here, the world building. It was so from the ground up. It was an amazing anthropological study of these spiders from the moment the humans got involved all the way through to the end of the book. It was stunning. And on top of that, I love the basic writing. The author made so many intelligent choices. While I was reading, I kept thinking, you know, if I faced this problem in my own writing, I wouldn't know how to solve it, but he comes up with the most brilliant solutions. For example, it's a multi-generational story to a degree, and instead of having a new character with a new name, he keeps the same name for the characters the entire way through. And part of that's their biology. They retain the memories from those who came before, but it was a brilliant way to keep his reader connected to the individuals. I also love the way he handled the human aspect of it in the sense of a long passage of time. I didn't lose connection with any of those characters either. And near the end of it, we read this one for Patreon Book Club, and we had a lot of really good debate on the morality of everything going on. And so particularly near the end, there was a lot of substance there, and it all came down to whether or not he stuck the landing, and he absolutely stuck the landing for me. One of the best bookenders that I've read in a while. I really loved it. Come to find out, the author has degrees in both zoology and psychology, which are two of my very favorite things. And you can see that extensive knowledge beyond the books in his writing here. The only thing I lament is that I did not enjoy the second book as much, so I'm kind of holding this one on a pedestal as maybe a standalone. But not liking that one doesn't take away from how much I absolutely love this one. So if you like sci-fi and you haven't read this one yet, give it a go. It is awesome. That's my lineup. What a great year. I'm absolutely thrilled that I had too many good books to choose from this year, and it's clear by this top list that I am focusing on the best books, and I really loved everything on here. It has been an amazing year for me, both in reading and on BookTube, and I just want to say thank you to my viewing audience. You are making this experience for me so much more fun. I love the discussions. I love that I have this passion for something that others share, and I have the opportunity to be a part of a community and connect because of that. So thank you for all of your watches, likes, comments, everything. Everything you do to support my channel, I'm really grateful. Here's hoping 2023 lands me with another lineup of amazing titles like this. I want to know what your top reads were for the year. Anything from my list make your list as well? I'd love to hear about it. Anyway, thanks again, and I hope to catch you next time.